Hey, this is Jon Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Col John McKay. He's been a guest of the show fairly recently. Pete and I both have great admiration for him. He grew up in Peru and Mexico, working in mines from the age of 9, which cultivated a resilience and an intimate familiarity with masculine, hard-working Latin culture. He eventually went to the U.S. Naval Academy, got an M.A. in government from Georgetown and an M.A. in national security strategy from the National War College. He's a lifetime member of the Disabled American Veterans and the Military Order of the Purple Heart, and is an adjunct professor at the California State University in Sacramento. Pete met with him, and they got into a conversation about, among other things, Cuban relations. Col McKay has served all over the world, including at Guantanamo Bay, and you're about to hear a point of view that you're not likely to have ever been exposed to unless you have a top-secret clearance. Not that he reveals anything top secret, just that you're not going to hear this conversation anywhere else. We're deeply honored to have him. Here's our guest today, Col John McKay.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Morata.
This is Stuart Copeland. This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is Jon Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Col John McKay, and you're listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with Jon Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, I'm back for more with Col John McKay, and Scott's not here this time, so that way I get to actually talk this time, because you know how authors are. They just won't ever shut up.
No comment.
But, yeah, Margot's here sitting as well, so you'll raise the red flag for us and pipe in when necessary. But we were just talking about your concept of wars of choice, and I feel like we're going to get off on a bit of a scholarly warrior kind of conversation with this, because it's interesting. You talked about how Korea, not really a war of choice because we're partnered with, the European nations, and how Vietnam is more of a war of choice. And then let's first define our terms. What is a war of choice, Professor?
You flatter me. Wars of choice are those wars that we get involved in that are not specifically declared by the Congress of the United States.
Okay.
Now, you can use the Gulf of Tonkin, the two incidents of the Gulf of Tonkin, for justification for wars of choice. The Senate approved that, overwhelming majority, unfortunately. But there was not a declaration of war issued by the Congress of the United States per the Constitution. Right. And I think it became very evident early on that we had gotten ourselves into something we had no idea the magnitude of it or the consequences of it. And I would consider it a war of choice. And, the assassination, supposedly with the knowledge, if not the concurrence and blessing, of President Kennedy, of South Vietnamese President Diem in 1963. There were some voices in the wilderness. There was an Army lieutenant colonel on his way back from Saigon to Washington. He spoke Vietnamese. He understood the culture. He had contacts, probably not all authorized with the still Viet Minh and Viet Cong. They respected him, and unfortunately he got killed on the way to the airport in an ambush that just went wrong. Mm-hmm. He was not specifically targeted, but he died. And I've written articles for Military Review out of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, on the criticality of knowing a language and understanding a culture. And you can't understand the culture without knowing the language.
So now you're speaking my language, because culture and here I'll push back with you on this, and from peer-to-peer respectfully, of course. I don't have a capacity for any specific language. I have the ability to kind of Chewbacca, listen and grunt, and within my very specific, Iraqi Arabic farming language, I know quite a bit because it's been talked at me so much. I've just kind of been immersed into it. But I am a master, and demonstrably so, at using an interpreter, and also taking that interpreter and turning them into half me, half my partner, and using them as a cultural, I don't want to say bomb, that's the wrong way, but a cultural beacon that allows me to receive messages otherwise impossible for me to get. And I would rather, in my specific case, obviously you're an exception because you Quechua and Spanish and everything else that you can speak. But for me, without that capacity and seeing people that come out of DLI, and I think we agree on the DLI part, but they're more worried about trying to speak the language. And then you come out of DLI with modern standard Arabic, you're ineffectual in the field, and you're so trying to keep up with what word is what does that mean? Like the word dipshi is watermelon in only part of Iraq, not even all of Iraq, right? So you're trying to always keep up. I don't know that if we're not willing to build professional capacity with interpreters, and we're certainly not willing to build professional capacity with language, just kind of whatever you would call what DLI grants is some basic conversational things. Is interpreter a better option where if everybody can get certified who's going to engage with people so that they can learn to use the cultural piece too? Because you don't necessarily get that unless you immerse for years.
I think the use of an interpreter, and I too have used an interpreter in the Arab world.
Yeah.
And I had a great interpreter, a better one. You miss out. You miss out. You were in a good position because you had not a fundamental, but you had a cursory knowledge of the language. And I mean that respectfully.
Yeah, thank you.
The nuances of understanding a culture, and as I said, an absolute prerequisite is knowledge of the language, which, I'm sorry, DLI does not provide you. But to be able to sit there and, depending on what culture you're dealing with, either look the guy in the eye or not look him in the eye, and how's he doing his hands?
Sure.
Is he fidgeting in his seat? And knowledge of the culture tells you something about why he's doing a particular body language that gives you the nuances of what is not being spoken between you. And it's a nuance that is critically important.
Yeah,
and we missed it in Vietnam. We missed it in Iraq.
Yeah. Well, as an institution, the military is not designed to create a cultural acuity. There's actually a scientific term called CQ. And the ability to immerse into a culture it's got rules that we've studied them academically. The willingness to see a different culture is one of the critical things. And nobody at the institutional level, at TRADOC or any of these other places, is creating that capacity reliably and repeatedly in service members who go abroad. Right? We're taught to fear culture. Don't use your left hand when you eat. Do this. Don't do that. And it's that is not acuity. That is a smart card looking at that, trying to figure out what to do.
That's right. That's right. And the other thing I mentioned in the first interview, and people will throw stones at me for this, particularly in the military. I think the Brits are past masters at it, and that is put yourself in the culture. Mm-hmm. Don't go home at night to your wife in the embassy compound and have your 2 drinks and go to bed speaking English the whole time, toddling the kiddies on your knee and all that. And I'm not saying anything out of turn in front of my wife. I went native, and I've done it. If I'd have spent more time in Mexico with DEA, I would have gone native. I certainly did in El Salvador. I certainly did when I was working for the agency in Peru.
Right.
I mean, I was by myself. I was in the jungle. I was non-declared, and
tell us what non-declared means, because not everybody knows.
That is where a U.S. government agency will not acknowledge that you're working for them.
Right.
And so if something happens to you, Non-declared includes not carrying an official or diplomatic passport. You're on a tourist passport. And it was a wonderful time because I had to leave the country every 3 months to get my tourist visa renewed. And of course that was all paid for, and go to exciting places like Santiago de Chile or Mendoza, Argentina, or something like that.
Yeah.
But if something happens to you, they can deny any association.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
he's a stupid American tourist wandering around where he shouldn't have been wandering around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that. I feel very comfortable with it. And again, I'm going to use a term that my wife has heard. Probably one of the best ways. It's actually a Spanish saying, but get yourself a long-haired dictionary.
Yeah. Why not, right?
Look at what before the government took it over, what the Brits on the East India Company back in the 1700s. I mean, they were living with Indian women. They understood the culture. They spoke the languages. They knew the nuances of everything. And I think as a country, we lack that.
How do we, and here we go, solving the biggest problems that we can take a bite out of, but how do we as an organization, let's just say DOD, and we'll keep it within that gigantic tent. How do we build that cultural capacity, though, so that I can insert, Lieutenant McKay into any country and know that person can, most of the time, reliably and repeatedly work within the culture? Because I totally agree with you, the ability to be in that culture, to allow things that are uncomfortable to be normal. There's so many things that Iraqis and Afghans do completely different than us. And it's just not my job to accept it and say that's a good idea, but it is my job to go, that's how they do it. Now let me figure out where and if anywhere we can intersect. And intersections, as you know, culturally are tough. You gotta be delicate, right? You can intersect, but you have to be, again, willing to see it, willing to work within it. And then I would submit that from my own experience, if I can find, if you were from Chile and I'm from the U.S. and we have goals, if I understand your goal and you understand mine, if I understand how you make decisions and you understand how I do, we're going to be able to collaborate. And if we use your path to get to our mutual benefit, that's great for me. I'm in your country. I don't need to make you go down my path. That's the very military way of doing it, though. How do we build that kind of capacity so that we can put, and maybe it's not Lieutenant McKay, maybe it's Captain, maybe you have to have a little more maturity and time, but what do you think?
Well, I think there's been rudimentary efforts. The Olmsted Scholar Foundation sponsors active duty military officers for 2 years to go overseas, and they do have to study in the language and that sort of thing. And as I've mentioned before, I was an Olmsted Scholar in Spain. I didn't go completely native there, but I think when General Olmsted was still alive, I think that there was much more emphasis within the foundation on this acculturalization process than there is today. I'm talking to recent Olmsted scholars. I've come away with the idea, God, it was just a great 2 years, and we did this and took the kids here and all that sort of thing. And well, what about the history of the country you studied in?
Sure.
And going back to the Arabic, I wish I was 19 years old and was in a situation that I could learn Arabic. I just find it, the culture of the region, so absolutely fascinating, but it is so opposite of what most Americans, even those that, quote, speak a little Arabic, they have no idea. I mean, the marriage of Islam and Arabic as a language.
Yeah.
That's a very complex thing that we have no comparable example within Western culture.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because there are things in Arabic where if you say a word that's in the Quran is holy, you will say it this way. Except for you go to Bosnia, where I've been, they say it different. It's the same word, but it's just like Latin languages where, a lot of words are very similar, but they slide.
Different meanings, different nuances.
Right. But it's a lot of it's akin to accent. So instead of saying, Ramadan, there's a little bit of a Z sound that slides in parts of Afghanistan. So it's like now you're saying Ramazan almost. Yeah. And that's not allowed. And if you ask anybody who's Islamic from that region, they'll say, we don't say it that way, but then you hear it. They do. So there's all these things you have to understand, like that's fine for them. They understand that. I hear something different. I just have to go with it. They know what they're saying. They know what they're doing. Here's another one. Culturally, I'm talking to a farmer, and we're in Taliban country. This is where they come from. Mullah Omar is just from down the road. And the farmer looks at me, and I've gained their trust. The guy looks over his shoulder. He looks around. He goes, all right, I'll tell you the secret. That to me is a factor of trust. And he's like, look, you guys are negotiating with the Taliban right now, trying to figure out how to strike a peace. I know that they're going to be part of the government. They're from here. What am I supposed to do? There's no answer for that for me. It's just write that down on the book and give that to the commander and go there. You have to deal with this on the ground.
The question comes up, will they deal with it, though?
Yeah. Well, who? The commander or the person on the ground?
That's right.
Yeah. Because there's the thing with the cultural part is it is true. Whatever you do, Mullah Omar is a key figure in that area and always will be. It'd be like coming here and saying George Washington is nothing. Like we would like, I can't even consider that because it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. No, the article I referred to in Military Review was, I will give you the exact quote. It was 2 years ago I wrote it, but it was something language and history.
Yeah.
Knowledge of both is a force multiplier.
It's true. It's true.
And I did push the Olmsted program a little bit, but I also pushed the East India British Company before it became part of the government. The idea of being able to immerse yourself in the culture, and that does not include going home every night to an English-speaking wife, and having your 2 martinis or going to church or everything. I made it a point when I was in the Middle East with my interpreter, who was just a really fine young man. I'd go to mosque with him when I went.
Sure.
And I'd pray with him. Because we were together most of the time. And I interacted with Palestinians in different areas, but come that time for prayer, and water was scarce. You washed your hands with sand, took your shoes off. And, I even had a prayer rug. Was I going to become Muslim?
Yeah.
No, but I had to respect his culture.
Yeah.
I think it was appreciated. I think it was reciprocated. And I was not in the intelligence business. I was training. But had I been in the intelligence business, I think that I would have been a treasure trove because of the things he told me.
Sure. Yeah, well, that willingness to make mistakes in their culture and then learn from them is powerful. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Explain it to me. I just published a paper, just came out, peer-reviewed, and we talk about the ethical pitfalls of female engagement in conflict zones because it's exceptionally tough to get right. And look, this is a feminist paper. People won't understand that because it's a bunch of 2 burly white dudes writing it and one guy's wife. But we're like, if we're going to do this, and we do believe that it's helping the mothers and the daughters, improve their position, but you can't. It's inappropriate to try to improve the position of anybody, especially an entire gender of people, without understanding their condition.
Absolutely.
And to your point about the language, of course, but also the books. And if you don't know who Gertrude Bell is in Iraq, and if you don't know who our example in the book is Benedicte Grima, who spent 12 years in Pashtunistan learning how to become a Pashtun woman, and in fact, through her cultural study, her ethnography. And if you don't have a command of her work, then how can you go and help Pashtun women in any way reliably?
Well, Bell is a fascinating study.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's amazing that at that time of she lost her fiancé in Gallipoli.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they were very deeply in love, but she did immerse herself. And if you think about that, the late teens, early 20s, and she went out, and she was always dressed like a woman, but she could speak the language.
Yeah.
Gain the confidence, the trust.
Respect.
And respect.
Yeah.
And the hatred of the Foreign Office. But
well, isn't that funny? You know, she had the one direction where she was powerful and able to engage national level leaders in
Iraq,
the Arab world, but not on the other side. I found this to be true myself. I mean, I don't go native. I wear civilian clothes. I wear a ball cap and tan pants and a t-shirt. But I have to spend. And I'm curious if you do recognize this. So I'll go out and I'll spend the whole day on a patrol, engaging with the locals and understanding and just slowly learning and building things up. And I like to go to the same areas so that I become familiar.
Right.
If I don't take the same time and delicate nature to approach the staff room, irrelevant. I'm dead.
Absolutely.
The sergeant major will hate me because I don't wear the right clothes. The staff will hate me because I've got the commander's ear because of what I write, even though I give everybody the report. So I have to always go back and build a reading list, double check with these majors, because I'll say, hey, Major Johnson in operations, how are my reports helping you? What can I do what information can I get you? Because I'm supposed to know the unknown. I'm like, oh yeah, Pete. That's the first factor. Do they say Pete or do they say Mr. Turner? Yeah, Pete. I read them. They're great. And I'm like, oh, good. What specifically? And I look at them and I give them the look where I'm like, I'm asking you, specifically about your integrity right now. And they'll go, okay, I'm not reading them. I'm like, well, listen, it's in the commander's brief book every day. I don't want you left out in the cold. And then they start to read it. But only through that level of delicate care can I stay alive on the military side.
Used to call that stroking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's very important. You're absolutely right. I ran into that in El Salvador. I mean, I was a junior diplomat in the embassy. Some of the reporting that I thought had gone out, as it came out in 1985 with the UN Truth Commission. A lot of the stuff I'd put in there that I think was critical was not in the reports. And I will have to give Ambassador Hinton credit because on the massacre at El Mozote, which occurred in December 1981, we didn't find out about it until January 82 through an article in the New York Times Magazine by Ray Bonner and Guillermo Peretta. They had snuck in from Honduras. And it was a U.S. trained battalion. The battalion actually was brought, the battalion, not the staff, was brought to Fort Benning for 6 months training. And I was quite close to the commanding officer of that battalion, Colonel Monterrosa, who got killed later. It was a horrible atrocity. And I wrote it up as such. And some of the things that I used, not speculation, but quotes from priests in the area.
Right.
One of a farmer. That did not appear in the cable that went to Washington.
Yeah. Yeah. I know about this too, yes.
So you understand what, you know exactly what.
And also the stuff you give, when I have my fingers about 3 inches apart, like it's on a knob, and they'll take your message that says, I don't know, the value is 15, and they'll just whoop, turn it all the way around until that the thing that you saw and experienced is completely not genuine anymore.
It's not relevant because it's so low.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. Or you'll see one line of part of what you've written in there. Like, that's my line. And that's completely taken out of context and says something different.
Put it in another part of the paragraph. Yeah.
Okay. So these wars of choice going forward, both Iraq wars, would you say, are those both wars of choice?
Well, if you're talking about the first one as Desert Storm,
Yeah.
I would say that it was a not to get too academic here, a just war.
Okay.
By the traditional criteria of Hustem Belli, Hust ad Belli, justification before going to war, and
right.
justification for what you do in the war. As much as he was criticized, I think President Bush handled that very well. I think it does not fall in the category of the war of choice that I would definitely say was initiated in what that would have been by his son, George W. Bush, 2003, March 2003. You talk about a blind man with a white stick stumbling around in a dark room. That's the way we went into Iraq.
Is there... Okay, fair. Obviously, he was leading a bunch of other blind men, too, by the way. Everybody had an idea.
Yeah, but they were all fanatics.
Yeah.
Your neocons, as they were called at the time, no names to be mentioned. And of course, a curious fact of that, none of them themselves had ever been to war.
Yeah, they're all ready to go out and do maneuver warfare and throw the big left hook and go out and do it with again, very little cultural knowledge, and a very poor plan B, really. Once we got, okay, now what do we do?
Plan X-ray. Seriously.
Yeah.
And you've got the same thing, and it concerns me here that you've got a dearth of knowledge of who you're dealing with Iran. It's a very ancient civilization, and you mix in the elements of the Quran, you mix in the elements of Islam.
Sure.
And it's an autocracy. It's a theocratic government. Well, that may or may not be true, but
right.
Is it relevant?
Yeah.
Where are these people coming from? How many people in positions? You mentioned DOD. I think that's limiting. What about at the executive level of government?
Yeah.
How many people speak Iranian? How many people speak Persian? Can read Persian poetry?
Yeah. Boy, and you talk about something important. Actually, today's show that went up, it's a guy named Kelly Hillier, and he was, at the time, a lieutenant, and he was charged with the safety and jailing of Saddam Hussein on the main camp in Baghdad. And part of that charge, there is no manual on how to care for and jail a head of state. Like, there is no MP manual, page 15, when jailing a head of state. So, and here's a guy that has the world stage constantly. So a lieutenant is given the charge of keep him calm. Let's not have him go on hunger strikes. Make sure that, this is after Abu Ghraib. So he's like, well, he had become my friend. If he wrote poetry, he wanted to read it to me, I was going to listen to it. And I was going to say, Nam Saddam. Yes, let's hear more. Because my job was to keep him calm, not complacent, but just in a respected place. This is a head of state. It's possible, not likely, but the value is less or more than zero that he could walk out of court exonerated. It was a possibility.
It was, yeah.
And in his head, in Saddam's head, it was a probability.
It was going to happen.
Yeah. So you're dealing with somebody that is highly volatile in terms of the world stage. And gosh, there's, to put that on a lieutenant, he handled it, but only by a very adept way of kind of dancing through, and poetry was a big part of it.
Yeah, that's going back to your original question.
Yeah.
I'm concerned not just because we have so few people that serve in the military in this country.
Sure.
And as a consequence, the great majority of the population has no concept of what military service is. It's an all-volunteer force. That goes back, in my opinion, to the facility with which wars of choice can be carried out. Because I don't have any skin in the game.
Yeah.
And besides, those people wear towels on their heads and they cover up their women, and they deserve it. This is the level of thinking.
Yeah.
And it's very disconcerting to both my wife and myself that you even find it among, quote, educated, comma, sophisticated people.
I could go on all day about that. I have a real problem with the State Department and their level of arrogance and ignorance. They send people into the field, highly educated, and I bet this will resonate with you. You're in a room full of 20 people. You're the person with the Kennedy School of Government degree, and they always think, that person from the State Department always thinks, from my experience across the board, they're the smartest person in the room. And they're in, fill in the blank, Afghanistan, Iraq, or whatever. And they don't speak Arabic. And they are on and on. And so how can you go out and do statecraft if you can't speak the language, can't use an interpreter, can't keep from rolling your eyes at the person who is the governor of the region?
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
Can't keep from rolling your eyes at the person who is the governor of the region. When I'm going to get all fired up.
And I'm familiar enough with the Palestinians. I have no experience, exposure, or example in Iraq. But with the Palestinians, eye contact is very important.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
and now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I was told again by my interpreter, if they start talking about family, don't make any contact.
Yeah,
act very interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's something an interpreter can give you that you may never catch on to.
You know, my wife, and then it's, oh, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. That sort of thing. I remember the chief of police, and I think he was, unfortunately, he was corrupt, but he was also very effective. Chief of police in Gaza, Palestinian chief of police, was a colonel. And you know, I was invited to his house in Gaza, which he did not buy on colonel's salary, but And I remember, I mean, these meals were just, they went on and on and on. But you never saw the women.
Yeah.
You could hear them in the kitchen. And you get a glimpse. Of course, they were all covered and everything. Yep. And it was just, and of course, the interpreter was there with me, but it was just, they're not there.
Yeah.
And you know, he said, compliment the host on the food. Don't say, please tell your wife.
Right. I was able to work even past that in a way, again, very delicately, very deliberately, and say, I'm curious about how women are portrayed in your society, you know, and I'd like to learn about this. I know better than to go back into the kitchen, but how does one understand what they do from a scholarly point of view? And that entry pays an enormous respect to that person because they're going to I am now the student and they are the teacher. It's their home country. And I could go on for days with that and use that conversation for months afterwards, where just that approach, that whole foundation being laid and learning about something that literally nobody else in the battalion could ever learn about because they were focused on other things.
I'll give you another example. And when I was last over in the Middle East, writing the report for the Special Envoy for Middle Eastern Regional Security, Margot accompanied me. And again, because of my previous contacts, I was able to get her introduced to quite a few Palestinian families.
Sure.
And that was, these were upper class families. I mean, they had money. But it was all women.
Yeah.
Period. And we kept contact with some of the people that had relatives here in the States. She's the one that kept contact. I think she has a very perceptive view of women and a niche slice of women. They weren't the women sweeping the streets or
Sure.
Doing your room. And, well, you didn't have any women doing your room anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But she's got a very, and she went over there with some pretty hard set ideas, and she came back a convert. Really.
Yeah. It's that has to be possible, right? You have to allow that to be a reality, that you're starting from a point. And the way John, when I'm over there, I know I'm going to make mistakes nonstop, but I have to be able to account for them, like this mistake, because that's the body of work that I put together that I learn off of, whether it's my mistake, institutional mistake, somebody else's mistake, like rolling your eyes at a governor. When that State Department guy rolled his eyes at the governor, I wanted to know where the governor was going to be 35 minutes later when that whole meeting was over. And we sat with him, and he was playing video games. He escaped out of the government center, went over to the American side, found his quote-unquote friends, and he's like, I just have to blow off some steam. I'm so effing pissed right now. And then so we just let him vent, and all this information came out. My whole philosophy as a spy is to collect less on threat. There's plenty of people focused on threat, and focus more on winning, because that right there, a governor pissed off leaving the government center, is not winning.
That's not winning.
The commander wants to know that and wants to fix that. So I always focused on those things where, like, no one else is going to find this out. And this all stems from a State Department guy who's in your battle space rolling his eyes. You want a trip out of town? Keep doing that to the commander's battle space, You
want to check out of the net. Keep doing that.
Yeah.
No, I agree. But I think, unfortunately, in spite of the highlight, the wall,
Yeah.
the refugees coming into this country, a growing Hispanic population within the body politic of the United States, I still think that there's a tremendous cultural ignorance on the part of the majority of Americans. And worse yet, I think there's almost a studied reluctance to try to learn something about culture. And again, I think that cuts across class, demographic, socioeconomic lines.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just, your black auto mechanic down at Ford.
Yeah.
It's also somebody that has a master's degree from a well-known institution.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, NIMBYism and all these things, they're all cultural things. It's all us and them. The police have an us and them problem.
Oh, they have a big, very, very big.
Yeah.
Well, and while we're on it, has nothing to do with this podcast, but the police, in my opinion, and I have worked at the federal level of law enforcement, the police have missed the boat on their training. And some of the lapses in police policing in this country, not just here, although we've got a couple of real glaring examples here, is, I think, could have been eliminated, certainly alleviated, by more emphasis on training on the person-to-person thing. And, I don't care if you're black, Hispanic, you got slant eyes, you're another person.
Yeah.
And we haven't trained that way. And then the other thing that has aggravated it tremendously, we've allowed the police to build up these tremendous SWAT teams.
Yeah.
That, they're paramilitary, really.
Yeah, factually, yes. I mean, you look at the police now from 20 years ago, and they are all tactical gear, And I'm not talking about bulletproof vests. I mean, the whole thing.
Yeah, and that impinges on the philosophy. Police is to maintain law and order.
Yeah. Yeah. They have the unique thing in a free society as being the main element of denying people's freedom. And when I saw that, Scott and I were at a veteran fundraiser thing, car wash, and there was a sheriff there. And this is not in any way about this sheriff in particular, but his outfit made me go, this person's a problem. This person wants to take my freedom. That's just the automatic response. Just his I don't want to say his visage, his whole persona, the way he stood, the clothes that he wore, that person I did not trust. And he'd done nothing to earn that in terms of interpersonal. It was just his persona that he had, how he was deployed to the street. And he was there as an absolute, officer friendly. I've got the dog here and everything else, but nothing about him from my cultural radar, which I think is pretty good, said, I'm approachable. I'm your friend. I felt like he wanted to give me a ticket the entire time.
Well, to be very crude about it, unfortunately, you've got a lot of people in the police. You got them in the military, too. The bigger weapon I carry, the bigger my dick is. So,
yeah.
Stand by. And I think that, unfortunately, my take on that, and having been in situations where I probably should have been carrying a weapon and made a judgment call not to carry a weapon.
Okay.
Many times, by carrying a weapon, you're endangering yourself more than if you're unarmed. If he'd have showed up with his dog, a badge on his chest, and not the .357 Magnum, whatever the hell it is today,
right? Yeah.
But would it have been a different situation?
Yeah. I hope. I
think it would have been. I mean, if some guy feels obligated to show up at a car wash, it's a fundraiser, like the Taliban is going to come over the hill in 5 minutes.
Yeah. And I don't know if he's looking for the Taliban, but I do think that our law enforcement, I don't want to make this about law enforcement people because I love the heck out of those guys, but just like the military, if everything is threat, then everything's a threat. And everything can't be a threat, and there's, just like with the border thing, most of what the folks that work on the border do is aid.
Yeah.
You're rescuing people that have crossed and are in the desert and are going to die or already dead or whatever. And we put those people under a tremendous strain, and we don't properly provision them with weapons, material, and, personnel. And so we ask a lot of these folks. And so, of course, we have nations make big decisions, and inevitably people die because of those decisions. The simplest thing.
Wars of choice.
Yeah. Speaking of wars of choice, as we look forward, I mean, obviously you've got a body of work that's just. When we did your intro for your show, your resume, as John read it, you've not met John, but he's co-host on the show. You made him emotional that you'd done so many things. He's like, God, it's just a great American. And you need to hear this because it's a fantastic body of work. And it's just incredible. So as you look forward, as someone who's got a lot of wisdom and experience and the power of culture, I mean, understanding that China's middle class is bigger than our entire nation and it's growing. They have to provision those people, and that means flexing out capacity and, they have a right to defend their sovereignty and they have to go find resources. How do we deal with the next or the modern conflict? Because these things are low level, intensity things where we're trying, hopefully we're done with big state on state, multiple state wars, hopefully. But what are we looking at, do you think? That's a big, hard question, by the way.
I'm not the Chicken Little running through the woods, the sky is falling. I think there's a dawning realization on the part of people that are thinking, both in and out of uniform. The idea of the World War II type battles, Stalingrad and the Ardennes and whatever. For our generation and the next couple generations, I think that is is lower on the probability list. The thing that concerns me, and people see me coming, I start talking about this and putting back in the basement type thing, is, we have in open sources, we know the North Koreans, we know the Chinese, we know the Russians, and the Iranians. They're working on modifying or being able to modify, deplete, or eliminate the electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean? I don't hear too much conversation about that. You've got the other thing that I think surfaced again in open sources, force on force in space.
Yeah.
Satellite killers.
Sure.
Not shot from the Earth, but from space. What's that do to your communications? If you eliminate, degrade the electromagnetic field, any car made after what, 1997, most of all computers.
Yeah.
Your cars don't run anymore. The pumps at the sanitation stations don't work anymore because they're all
big
computers.
Problems. Yeah.
And then you have the capability, or looking at the capability, to knock out satellites.
Yeah.
Are these military satellites? How do you know? Are they satellites that have a lot to do with our telecommunications, so
Sure.
I can call grandma?
Yeah.
What happens when that goes out? How about pharmacies? Everything's dispersed by computers.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We're on a list. We get certain things, and that's all comes in the mail right on time.
Yeah.
There's not somebody packing it up and writing out the label. It's the computer that's doing all. What happens if that's degraded or shut down?
How fast can you move money without a computer? And how much can you move? Because, I don't carry much cash around. Maybe $40 in my pocket on any given day, but most likely less.
I'm one of the naysayers. I don't use I don't have a smartphone.
Yeah.
I don't use.
But you're a car from before 1997. How many cars are they? There's only so many. People use their phones. They use email to send money. So there's all these electronic means of sending and moving money. All of a sudden, you had to move
instantaneously.
Yeah, instantaneously. Right.
Yeah, I ran into that. We saw that in DEA.
Yeah.
I mean, tremendous amounts of money.
Yeah.
The same thing with money laundering.
Sure.
So much of that is done by a computer.
There's even what they call unmanned, unstoppable companies that have a low threshold for complexity. You can literally set up around the world a bunch of servers that just do a task, and it's a company, and they are paying a little bit out, but they take a little micro piece of the dollar, and they do this function. Like moving money is one of the ways. You don't have to have anybody.
Nobody's sitting there doing that.
Nobody's sitting there.
It's a computer.
Right. And so billions, trillions of dollars are sitting in computer software floating around the world, and then like that, it could all be gone if you have the means and the desire to push that kind of button.
Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about that. What do you do post money when money's all of a sudden important,
Yeah. All of a sudden, Stalingrad doesn't look so unattractive.
Yeah.
Horrible though it was.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the Ardennes, right? And everybody can seem to find old bombs.
But how many people die if the money circulation is inhibited or completely shut down?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's terrifying. So, okay, we got a few more minutes here. Do you want to ask me a question? I guess I should offer that to you.
No,
Okay.
other than I'd like to continue this.
Sure.
I think it's. I don't think it's philosophical. Might be existential to a degree, but it's not philosophical. And I think that without seeming to bemoan the current state of affairs, there can be things that I can point out through my experience, my exposure. used the word wisdom. I'm not too sure that was judicious, but I give you many examples of lack of wisdom. The ability, and another thing we can get into is I'm certainly not an expert on it, is AI. I mean, artificial intelligence. Sure. Where do we cross a threshold that the human being, the human mind, becomes secondary to something that is run off of electrons?
Yeah.
Do we ever get there? I don't know. And that's Margot. She doesn't chide me, but I still, when I do something, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of money, but particularly about my writing, I like to talk to a person. Emails, I fully appreciate, understand, and utilize the efficiency of emails. But that is a quantum jump from, hey, Jill, what do you think about this?
Jill.
I mean, she's an editor.
Okay.
Don't get any idea. But the human beings have a base necessity for interaction. Okay. We're social animals. Yeah. And what does artificial intelligence portend for the sociability among people? And we could go into not artificial intelligence. My wife and I have had this discussion with people that have gone through this horror show, the business of kids sitting on couches and texting, and take a look at suicide rates and some other societal indicators. What kind of future are we looking at here?
Yeah, and we've managed to. I'm going to jump on the angry old man, put him in the basement train. But when we take a fine institution like Sac State, and we freak out kids if they don't get into Sac State, because there's what are we doing? And you're not talking about Stanford or Harvard. We're talking about a excellent but a state school that you can get into. Whether you take a junior college path or wait and get some money from the military, you can get into Sac State. Maybe not the first time you apply, but it's not the end-all, be-all of your whole life. But we've started to create this dynamic. Down in Southern California, the same thing. So the AI question is interesting. I've had a lot of technology people on my other show, Popping the Bubble, and I've learned a lot about this. And a couple of the rules that I've learned is the pace of innovation always exceeds the pace of automation. So that's a good thing as long as we're able to adapt with this innovation speed, which means, we're not going to farm as much. We're not going to do whatever. Or one farmer can handle more land. Yep. And then what do you grow? Is it you go to a vegetable-based protein diet? Okay, all these things are helped by AI, so there's good things. You cannot bet against software developers. They go into a problem and they look at it spherically and they handle one little piece, and then someone else has another little piece, and another person bridges those two pieces together, and then someone else fills it. It's like a spider web that's constantly being populated, and you can't bet against those guys because they just iterate and improve and in theory improve. And even if it's 1%, 10 years from now, the world looks completely different. And that seems to be a thing that we do.
That's my concern.
Yeah, and so at some point, how do you stop? Not stop, but how do you contend with the constant evolution if you don't have the time to build wisdom? And if wisdom gives way to iteration, where you don't worry about right now because we're going to change that in 5 minutes.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, that's an existential problem. You want to talk about?
Absolutely, absolutely.
How do you? So, how does a young person? How do you mass wisdom? I mean, what do you do?
As Margot will tell you, I'm a strange puppy.
Okay,
and I think one of the things that has been a tremendous asset, and I think you could compellingly argue you're born this way. Mm-hmm. I have an unstoppable curiosity.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's not just how's the mantle clock work. Why the hell's that guy doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And rather than going over and say, what the fuck are you doing? I would rather go over and say, hey.
Yeah.
And to try new things, to do new things. And then the other thing I alluded to in the first broadcast was, I don't have an answer for this. Why, after being opposed to Vietnam, I mean, my first tour was in 67.
Yeah.
We, in my humble opinion, weren't going to win this war. And yet I knew that within a year I would be back and I'd be the guy on the ground pulling the trigger. And yet, after all that happened to me, why did I continue to seek out those positions that always put me in harm's way?
Yeah.
Naval attaché to El Salvador, time with DEA in Mexico.
Sure.
And that's another thing we talk about, the drug epidemic. I mean,
yeah.
But hey, that's topic for another day.
But there are people that are wired to, adrenaline, sure, but it's more of a massive problem that I think guys like us, we can do our own little software design. Like, look, if you just spend, I had an op was run on me in Afghanistan. My partner and I would go out into the field and we would ask questions. And I always am up front. I don't try to say I'm not a spy because they get to decide if I'm a spy or not. So what kind of a spy am I? So yes, I'm here to find things out. You want to tell me about bad things? Glad to hear those things. But mostly I want to understand you guys. And if I ask a question you don't like, don't answer it. And so that turns into a scholarly respect for who they are. That's how I work the cultural piece of it. So we're doing well. We're creating an impact, and farmers and elders from outlying areas are now coming into the governance center. We're trying to build belief in the government, slowly but surely, and fledglingly at best. And then we find out that the Taliban had called for a meeting and they wanted us there so they could see for themselves. And that sounds terrifying, but it's really a win. Because they signed off and said those guys are okay by us because they're scholars, they're men of respect, and they understand what's going on here. Because we were seeking to understand, and they could see that.
Let me give you another example and probably
Perfect.
wrap it up here. It was when I was commanding officer JTF, and I think Cuban migrant operation down in Guantanamo Bay, 1995-96. One of my collateral duties, which nobody wanted to talk about, I was negotiating with the Cubans. I mean, that came from the NSC. Congress knew about it. It wasn't John McKay playing the Maverick, and I had
not this time.
And I had an excellent commanding officer who, fortunately, Margo has met, Jack Sheehan, who was a 4-star general, and he backed me up all the way. And we did some very, very unusual things. But I always had an interpreter with me. I never used him.
Right.
In fact, I think I spoke better Spanish than he did. So my interaction with the Cuban general was phenomenal. I mean, I'd love to get back to Cuba just to see him. He was a communist, 2 tours in Africa.
Yeah.
He'd seen the elephant. But what a great guy to work for. And we had negotiated. My predecessor had started this, who also spoke very good Spanish. He was a Navy admiral. But he had started this. But under my command, we were able to take crew-served weapons off the line.
Wow.
Mortars, machine guns.
Yeah.
And we were happy. I don't know if it was overhead or whatever, but they verified the Cubans had complied. We were at the point of pulling back artillery pieces so they were out of range of each other. Mm-hmm. We had already put our 198. You remember those? Mm-hmm. The 155.
Yeah.
We'd already put them in. They were getting ready to be shipped out. So, they had Russian overhead stuff. We knew it. We had them in sheds, but you can find them. So there was not only the personal rapport aspect of the trust and
Right.
confidence. There were concrete steps that
Yeah.
were being taken by both sides.
Yeah.
General Perez invited me to spend a day with him in Cuba.
Wow.
General Shalikashvili approved it.
Okay.
Berger on the NSC said no, and the president said no. And if you remember, 1996 was an election year.
Yeah.
And Clinton had lost the electoral votes in Florida the first time around.
Right.
If an American was going to go play footsies with the Cubans, and
Yeah.
that got to Florida. But that, again,
Yeah.
short-term gain
Right.
at the expense of maybe doing something that could have
Really
had
special,
really
yeah.
positive
'Cause
consequences.
and I don't want to extend this too long, but you're right. Like this trust has to be verified in these cases because it's very volatile. And where I was, especially, it's very hard for an Afghan to trust an American because they'll trust the big American picture. Like, we're going to come here and do our best to help and have a lot of money. They trust that. But the specific trust, you have to start with low risk. Like, I'm going to show up at this time, but have the respect to say when the Americans are really bad at just showing up. Like, we're having a meeting right now. Like, well, I had a whole day planned. Thanks. So I wouldn't do that. But that reciprocation of trust, like, we're going to do this and you're going to do that. And then we slowly learn very incrementally that we can have bigger trust. And when you have that invite to come across the fence, that's an enormous win right there.
Well, going back and wrap up on this,
Yeah.
because I'm sure you've seen it in the Muslim world, and Americans are horrible. It's going back to, we're going to have a meeting right now. And the Spanish picked it up. I mean, the Berbers were in Spain for almost 800 years.
Yeah.
Come on now, and
Yeah.
and this business it's obligatory. It's absolutely obligatory. Depending on what your level of interaction is.
Yeah.
Kiss on the cheeks, pat on the back, shake of the hand. Next 15, 20 minutes. How's the wife? How's
Yeah.
the kid? How's the dog? Little children getting through the mosque, all right?
Yeah.
Any problem? You do that. Absolutely meaningless. No business is conducted, but it is obligatory. And you do the same thing in Spanish. And I've had guys that spoke decent Spanish say, Estoy aquí para hacer eso. I'm here to make sure this happens.
Yeah.
That's the first word out of the mouth.
I love, my commander wants you to do this.
Oh, that. You never do that. I don't know. The Arab society, you don't do that.
No.
You don't do it in the Latin American side. It's, by the way, would it be an inconvenience if you considered looking at this idea?
Well, thanks, man. We should do more of these, right?
I'd like to. Any problem?